so this lesson is going to be about jazz guitar rather than jazz piano. But we are starting at the piano just because it's more visual in that you can actually see the notes. Now, one way of playing jazz piano is to pick chord voicings such that the melody note is on top. For example, the first chord of Satin Doll is a D minor 7, and the first melody note is an A. So if we wanted to play this in this particular jazz piano style, we want to pick a voicing of the chord D minor 7 such that we can put the melody note on top. So we could play D, F, C, A. So we've got the first, third, fifth, and seventh. Then we play the melody on top of this voicing. Next we have the chord G7 with the melody note of G. So again we can pick a voicing that has the note G on top. Let's say we play D, F, B, G. So this time it's the 5th, 7th, 3rd and root. And so again you play the melody. And we keep doing this all the way through the song. But where the melody note is not a note that's already in the chord, that's fine, we just play a chord voicing that allows us to add the melody note on top. Now, to play jazz guitar, you do the exact same thing, that is, picking chord voicings that allow you to put the melody note on top, but on guitar. So for example, using this idea, you could play the jazz standard Girl Talk on guitar as follows. So everyone who's played guitar has heard of the CAGED system. All it is learning to play the C, A, G, E and D chords on guitar. These are played in open position and essentially give you 5 different voicings or shapes of major chords. You can then take those shapes and move them up the neck using bar chords. So for example, the E shape can be moved up the neck to create the F, F sharp, G, and so on. And you can do the same thing with all the other chord shapes. So again, all that's happening here is that we have learnt 5 different voicings for the major chord. Now we can take this same idea and apply it to jazz. Unfortunately, because it's jazz, this means it's going to be a bit more complex. Instead of 5 voicings for the major chord, we're going to learn 16 voicings for the major 7 chord. And I'm going to show them on screen now. So they're divided up into 4 categories, which I've represented as bars. The chords in the first bar all have their bass note or their lowest note on the 6th string. And they're all just inversions of each other, starting on the root, 3rd, 5th and 7th, so going from root position, 1st, 2nd and 3rd inversion. The chords in the second bar are exactly the same as the chords in the first bar, but the note on the 6th string has been moved across to the 1st string. Otherwise, they're the same chord and the same voicing. The chords in the third bar all have their bass note on the fifth string and are again just inversions of each other. And the chords in the fourth bar are a few more miscellaneous chords that you should know. Now you'll also notice that all these chords contain only 4 notes. We do this for a number of reasons. First, playing both the 6th and the 5th string in a chord will make it sound too heavy and bassy and thick, which is fine for rock or pop, but generally we want a slightly lighter sound for jazz. Second, we want to generally avoid repeating notes where we can. There's no need to play the note G twice in a chord voicing. Again, that's fine for rock and pop, but is generally avoided in jazz because it makes the chord sound a bit lopsided. Though it is sometimes inevitable, like with the last chord shape in that list. And you'll also have noticed that most of these chords do not use open strings. The reason for this is that we want to be able to transpose them up the neck to any chord. Even the 2 chord shapes with open notes can be used up the neck without open notes. So when learning these, I would recommend learning them in order as written, 1 bar at a time, and think of them in terms of inversions. So this is your root position chord, then your first inversion chord, and your second inversion chord, and then finally your third inversion chord. So you're thinking of them as different inversions or variations of the same general shape. You'll also notice that the 3rd and the 7th of these chords are coloured in. That's because, as well as learning the chord shape, you also need to memorize where the 3rd and the 7th of each chord is. The reason for this is that we can convert this major 7 chord into a dominant 7 chord or a minor 7 chord by flattening the 3rd and or 7th. So for example, if you know the major 7 chord, and you know the 3rd and the 7th are on the middle strings, then we could easily convert this into a dominant 7 chord and a minor 7 chord just by flattening the 7th and then the 3rd respectively. So then, rather than learning 16 chord shapes for each chord type, major, minor, dominant, just memorize the major 7 chord shapes and memorize where the 3rds and 7ths are so that you can flatten them by 1 fret to get to your dominant and minor chords. Now, having memorized all that, which I admit is quite a feat, we can now apply it to a jazz song. So take the song you want to learn and find a chord shape of the written chord that allows you to play the melody note on top. So for example, Girl Talk starts with the melody note G over an E flat major 7 chord. So we need to pick an E flat major 7 chord that allows us to play the note G on top. So I picked this one. Then it moves to an A7 with the melody note still being a G. So again, I need to find an A7 chord shape that allows me to play the G on top. So I played this. So together it was the E flat major with the G on top, going to the A7 with the G on top. And then you just need to do this through the entire song, taking account of every melody note and every chord. And yes, that is going to take quite some time, but conceptually it's quite simple. It may take you a few hours to do, but that's half the fun and half the challenge. Now, as well as doing this, I also added in a few jazzy techniques that are really easy to play on guitar because it's a fretted instrument. They are side-slipping, approach chords, and having a semi-independent bass line. When I moved from the E flat major 7 to the A7, I didn't just go straight to the next chord. I put in a little approach note, a semitone out, hitting that A sharp, so a semitone higher, and then I slid down to the A7. Similarly, in bar 5, I didn't just play the chords as written, I used a bit of side slipping where I slipped down a semitone, keeping the same shape, and then slipped back up. And I also added in a few extra bass notes, plucked with my thumb in the right hand, to create a semi-independent bass line over the chord. And again, usually my bass line just moved by step or kind of slid down to get to the next root note, for example. And I also generally prefer voicings that have a root note in the bass, as this tends to sound a little bit harmonically stronger. But where this is too hard, I played another voicing. So you would have probably deduced by now that there is no single way of playing a particular song. You'll be able to find multiple ways of playing the melody on multiple different strings using multiple chord shapes, all of the same chord. But that's part of the magic and the challenge of jazz guitar. It's picking a series of chord shapes that get you to the appropriate chord that are easy to get to, but also sound interesting and jazzy and good. But that, of course, is entirely up to you. Cool, thanks for watching guys, see ya.